Al Jolson was more than just a performer, he was a cultural phenomenon. From his early days in vaudeville to becoming Hollywood's first major talking film star, his electrifying stage presence and groundbreaking contributions to music and cinema changed the entertainment industry forever. But his legacy remains controversial, as his use of blackface continues to spark debate. Join us as we uncover the story of Al Jolson, the man, the myth, and the complicated legend. Al Jolson was born Asa Jolson on May 26, 1886, in the small village of Srednik, located in what was then part of the Russian Empire, modern-day Lithuania. He was the youngest of 4 children in a devout Jewish family. His father, Moshe Jolson, was a cantor, a highly respected figure in Jewish religious services, responsible for leading prayers through song. From an early age, Asa and his siblings were raised in an environment steeped in Jewish traditions, with expectations that they would follow religious paths similar to their fathers. Despite the family's faith, life in Imperial Russia was harsh for Jewish communities, who faced persecution, strict societal restrictions, and violent pogroms. Recognizing the dangers and limited opportunities, Moshe made the bold decision to immigrate to America in 1894, seeking a safer and more prosperous future. He traveled alone to Washington, D.C., where he became a congregation rabbi. A year later, in 1895, he arranged for his wife and children to join him, setting the stage for a dramatic shift in the family's life. However, the transition to a new country was anything but easy. Just a year after arriving in America, Asa suffered a devastating loss. His mother passed away suddenly. At only 8 years old, he was deeply affected by her death, retreating into himself as he struggled to process the grief. His mother had been his primary caretaker, and her absence left an emotional void that would shape his future. Moshe, now a widowed father and devoted religious leader, attempted to instill Jewish values in his children, hoping they would carry on the faith and traditions of their heritage. However, Asa and his older brother Hirsch found it difficult to conform to the strict religious expectations placed upon them. They were drawn not to the synagogue, but to the streets of Washington, D.C., where life was full of movement, music, and entertainment. To help support themselves, the brothers took up newsboy jobs, spending their days hawking newspapers and mingling with the city's diverse population. They became enthralled by the vibrant energy of the streets, especially the lively ragtime and jazz music that flowed from bars, theaters, and saloons. Their fascination with this new culture clashed with their father's expectations. Eager to assimilate into American society and distance themselves from their strict upbringing, both boys changed their names. Asa became Al, and Hirsch became Harry. They frequently ran away from home, seeking adventure beyond the confines of their father's household. At one point, Al even spent time in an orphanage, a sign of how far he had drifted from the structured religious life his father had envisioned. Despite the tension between them, Al and Harry shared a strong bond. They encouraged each other's musical ambitions, learning to mimic the styles and rhythms of the performers they admired. They quickly absorbed the sounds of African American jazz, ragtime, and blues, which would later influence Al's unique performance style. Moshe Jolson, though a dedicated father, struggled to understand his son's ambitions. He had immigrated to America with hopes of securing a better future for his children, yet he watched as they rejected the traditions he held dear. He had envisioned them becoming religious scholars or leaders, not vaudeville performers. This fundamental difference in values created a lifelong divide between father and sons. For Harry, this conflict was particularly difficult. As the eldest son, he initially had a stronger connection to their father and may have felt torn between tradition and ambition. However, as the brothers grew older, Their shared passion for entertainment drew them even closer. They eventually pursued a career in vaudeville together, supporting each other through the ups and downs of the industry. Al Jolson's journey into show business began in the early 1900s when he and his brother Harry joined burlesque and vaudeville acts. These traveling theatrical performances were a mix of comedy, music, and dance, attracting audiences across the country. To better assimilate into mainstream American entertainment, they changed their surname from Jolson to Jolson, hoping to distance themselves from their Jewish heritage. In 1904, during a performance at the Keeney Theater in Brooklyn, Jolson made a bold and career-defining decision. He began performing in blackface. While now widely condemned, blackface was a common and accepted practice in the entertainment industry at the time, particularly in minstrel shows. For Jolson, it became a transformative mask, allowing him to fully embrace performance, shed his personal insecurities, and connect with audiences in an entirely new way. His exaggerated facial expressions, lively stage presence, and impassioned singing style quickly set him apart from other performers, earning him bookings at prestigious vaudeville venues across the country. By 1906, Jolson had branded himself as a singing comedian, incorporating dramatic vocal flourishes, energetic whistling, and animated body language into his performances. His shows were infused with the jazz, ragtime, and blues music he had fallen in love with as a child, but the minstrel show format of the time remained centered on Civil War-era songs. Frustrated by these creative limitations, he made the bold decision to leave minstrel shows behind and launch a solo career. Jolson's uninhibited, high-energy style quickly set him apart from other entertainers of his era. His stage movements, dramatic knee slides, outstretched arms, and dynamic physical expressions were groundbreaking. Decades later, similar performance techniques would be credited to rock and roll stars like Elvis Presley, but in reality, Jolson had pioneered them first. At a time when black entertainers faced severe racial discrimination and white performers were expected to follow rigid theatrical traditions, Jolson's daring stage presence helped redefine what a musical performance could be. His breakthrough on Broadway came in 1911 with La Belle Parée, a musical production that introduced him to mainstream theater audiences. He continued working with the influential Schubert brothers, leading Broadway producers, and soon became the biggest star at the Winter Garden Theater. His shows became legendary, not just for his talent, but for his ability to form a direct connection with audiences. It was common for his scheduled 15-minute performances to stretch far beyond their allotted time, as he returned for encore after encore, feeding off the crowd's energy. By the 1920s, Jolson had become one of the most famous entertainers in America, earning the title of the world's greatest entertainer. His fame reached new heights in 1927 when he starred in The Jazz Singer, the first feature-length film with synchronized sound. His famous line, "You ain't heard nothing yet," became one of the most iconic phrases in film history. The Jazz Singer revolutionized the entertainment industry, marking the transition from silent films to talkies, and cementing Jolson's place as one of Hollywood's first true stars. Despite this massive success, Jolson's career began to face new challenges in the 1930s. The Great Depression significantly reduced public spending on entertainment, and his popularity started to decline. He transitioned to radio, but his early attempts met with little success. Determined to reclaim his place in the spotlight, he staged a comeback in 1936 and returned to Broadway in 1940 with the production Hold On to Your Hats, which helped him regain some of his lost fame. When World War II broke out, Jolson found a new sense of purpose. Devoting himself to performing for American troops, he traveled to war zones, bringing music and laughter to soldiers on the front lines. Though he continued making radio appearances, his focus remained on entertaining and uplifting the morale of those fighting overseas. The attack on Pearl Harbor shook him out of a period of professional stagnation, and he immediately sought ways to contribute. Even before the USO had fully organized its overseas entertainment program, Jolson personally contacted officials in the War and Navy departments, insisting that he would perform for any American serviceman anywhere in the world. By early 1942, he became the first star to perform at a U.S. military base during the war. Jolson threw himself into entertaining the troops with relentless energy, often doing as many as 4 shows a day in remote and difficult conditions. He toured jungle outposts in Central America, visited a string of U.S. naval bases, and even paid for parts of his travel out of his own pocket. When he arrived unannounced for a show in England, the response from soldiers was overwhelming, with a reporter describing the scene as pandemonium. The impact of his performances did not go unnoticed. One New York Times article noted that Jolson had played to more soldiers than any other entertainer, traveling to bases in Britain, Northern Ireland, Alaska, and the Caribbean. In an article he wrote for Variety in 1942, he described the extreme conditions he faced, recalling how he performed in foxholes, gun emplacements, and dugouts. Wherever 2 or more soldiers were gathered, it became his stage. A letter from the 33rd Infantry even named him Public Morale Lifter Number 1 of the U.S. Army. Jolson's dedication went beyond entertainment. He officially enlisted in the USO, and despite being over the age of 45, he was given a special rank that allowed him to wear a military uniform and hold the standing of an officer. His commitment took a toll on his health, however. While touring in the Pacific, he contracted malaria, which led to severe complications requiring the surgical removal of his left lung. Despite this setback, he was honored in 1946 with a special tribute from the American Veterans Committee for his service to the troops. Just a few years later, when the Korean War erupted in 1950, Jolson was determined to continue his mission. Frustrated by government bureaucracy, he personally contacted the White House and even pledged to fund his own trip if necessary. In September of that year, he became the first major entertainer to arrive in Korea, performing 42 shows in just 16 days. He endured grueling conditions, but his performances brought joy to the troops, with one soldier describing how Jolson's signature kneeling performance of Mammy moved the audience to both cheers and tears. Jolson's dedication to entertaining American troops cemented his status as a patriotic figure, but his legacy remains deeply complicated. While he was revered for his tireless efforts to uplift soldiers during wartime, his career was also marked by controversy, most notably his use of blackface. During the early 20th century, blackface was a widely accepted staple of American entertainment, particularly in vaudeville and minstrel shows. White performers would darken their faces with makeup and exaggerate their lips to mimic and caricature black individuals, often relying on exaggerated stereotypes that reinforced racial prejudices. Jolson did not invent blackface, but he became one of its most famous practitioners, using it throughout his career in live performances, Broadway shows, and films, like The Jazz Singer. Jolson, however, saw himself not as a racist performer, but as an advocate for black music and culture. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he was a vocal supporter of African American artists, championing their talents and advocating for their inclusion in mainstream entertainment. He was one of the first white entertainers to bring jazz, blues, and ragtime, musical styles pioneered by black musicians, to predominantly white audiences. He credited black artists as his inspiration and openly supported the work of black composers and performers when it was still uncommon to do so. For instance, Jolson played a pivotal role in helping Cab Calloway and Eubie Blake, two groundbreaking black musicians, gain wider recognition. He also insisted that his film Hallelujah, I'm a Bum, 1933, depict black characters in a more sympathetic and dignified light than was typical for Hollywood at the time. Some historians argue that Jolson, given his era, was progressive in his genuine appreciation and promotion of black music, and that he used his influence to challenge some of the racial barriers in the entertainment industry. However, despite his intentions, none of this negates the inherent racism of blackface. While Jolson may have viewed his performances as an homage to black culture, his acts still relied on racial stereotypes and perpetuated harmful depictions of African Americans. His most famous blackface performances often portrayed sentimentalized images of black life, such as the devoted servant longing for the Old South in My Mammy. These portrayals romanticized a past that, for black Americans, was rooted in oppression and suffering. Even though Jolson may have believed he was honoring the music, he was still participating in an art form that dehumanized the very people he claimed to admire. Today, blackface is widely recognized as offensive and unacceptable, and it remains one of the most controversial aspects of Jolson's legacy. While some argue that he was progressive for his time, others point out that his use of blackface helped normalize a practice that demeaned black Americans. His contributions to the popularization of jazz and blues remain significant, but they cannot be separated from the racial dynamics of the era in which he performed. Beyond his on-stage controversies, Jolson was also notorious for his difficult personality. He was known to be controlling, temperamental, and egotistical, often clashing with colleagues, directors, and even his own family. Many who worked with him described him as emotionally volatile, capable of immense charm one moment and overwhelming arrogance the next. His demanding nature often led to conflicts, and he had a reputation for needing to be the center of attention in every situation. Al Jolson's relentless dedication to his career and insatiable need for the spotlight were not confined to the stage. They extended deeply into his personal relationships, particularly his marriages. Over the course of his life, Jolson married 4 times, and each relationship reflected his internal struggle between love, control, and ambition. While he sought companionship, his domineering personality and singular focus on performing often made it difficult for him to sustain meaningful, long-term connections. His inability to balance personal and professional life led to repeated patterns of conflict, emotional distance, and ultimately failed marriages. His first marriage to Henrietta Keller in 1911 seemed promising at first. Keller was a young dancer who dreamed of building a stable home life, and she hoped that marriage would encourage Jolson to settle down. However, Jolson's commitment to his career far outweighed any interest in domesticity. As his fame continued to grow, so did his workload, with Broadway performances, touring schedules, and recording sessions consuming nearly every aspect of his life. He was unwilling, or perhaps unable, to step away from the spotlight, leaving Keller feeling neglected and unfulfilled. After nearly a decade of loneliness and frustration, she divorced him in 1920, becoming the first of several women to realize that life with Al Jolson meant competing with an audience for his attention. Barely 2 years later, in 1922, Jolson married Ethel Delmar, a singer who shared his passion for music. On the surface, they had more in common than he and Keller, but once again, Jolson's ambition took precedence over his marriage. Delmar, despite her own musical background, found herself playing a secondary role to Jolson's career. He was always moving, always chasing the next show, The next film, the next audience's applause. While she may have initially understood his devotion to his craft, she soon realized that there was little room for a wife in his world. Their marriage lasted 6 years before ending in 1928, with Delmar walking away from a relationship where she felt more like an afterthought than a partner. Jolson's most high-profile and tumultuous marriage came in 1929 when he wed Ruby Keeler, a talented Broadway dancer whose career was on the rise. Their union at first seemed like the perfect pairing of two stars at the height of their fame. However, Keeler soon discovered that being married to Jolson meant living in his shadow. Jolson was deeply possessive and emotionally demanding, expecting her to abandon her own aspirations to focus on their marriage. He was controlling and overbearing, struggling to accept that Keeler was an independent woman with ambitions of her own. The more Keeler resisted his efforts to dominate her career, the more their relationship deteriorated. While she continued to perform in successful Broadway productions and films, Jolson grew resentful, unable to accept that his wife was carving out a legacy independent of him. Rather than bringing them closer, their adoption of a son only heightened their tensions. Jolson's need for control clashed with Keeler's increasing independence, and by 1939, their marriage had collapsed beyond repair. Keeler left, taking their adopted child with her, and raised him alongside her next husband. For Jolson, the loss was profound, not just of his wife, but of the family life he had so often sacrificed for his career. For several years after his divorce from Keeler, Jolson remained unmarried, throwing himself into his wartime entertainment efforts. He performed tirelessly for American troops during World War II, traveling across the world and risking his health in the process. It wasn't until later in life, after facing serious health complications, that he decided to pursue companionship once again. In 1945, Jolson met Errol Galbraith, a military X-ray technician who was vastly different from his previous wives. Unlike the dancers and performers he had been drawn to in the past, Galbraith had no connection to show business. This perhaps was what made their relationship different. She was also one of the few people who could stand up to Jolson's temper, earning his respect rather than his resentment. With Galbraith, Jolson finally seemed to embrace fatherhood in a more meaningful way, and together they adopted 2 children, Asa Jr. and Alicia. For the first time, he appeared to genuinely invest in his family life, though his declining health limited his ability to be a fully present father. His relationship with his children was complicated. While he adored them, he remained a performer first and a parent second. Even when he was home, his mind was often elsewhere, consumed by his career. His daughter, Alicia, had mental impairments and was later placed in an institution, a common practice at the time for children with disabilities. Little is known about her life after this, and Jolson's direct involvement in her care remains unclear. Asa Jr., on the other hand, grew up leading a more typical life, though his relationship with his father was undoubtedly shaped by the same distance and emotional intensity that had marked Jolson's previous relationships. Jolson's difficulties in maintaining personal relationships were not limited to his marriages. His professional and family relationships were equally strained. His need for control and recognition made him both a revered figure and a polarizing presence, leading to conflicts with colleagues, collaborators, and even his own brother. Though widely admired for his talent and groundbreaking contributions to entertainment, Jolson was also notoriously difficult to work with. He had a reputation for being demanding, egotistical, and unwilling to compromise, traits that often put him at odds with directors, producers, and fellow performers. He expected absolute control over his performances and would clash with anyone who challenged his vision. Many in the entertainment industry found him exhausting to collaborate with, as his larger-than-life persona extended beyond the stage and into his everyday interactions. This controlling nature also defined his relationship with his older brother, Harry Jolson, who struggled to escape Al's overwhelming shadow. Harry, like Al, pursued a career in show business, but despite his talents, he never came close to achieving the same level of fame. The comparison between the two brothers was inevitable and relentless, leaving Harry with a sense of lifelong resentment. While Al was soaring to Broadway and Hollywood superstardom, Harry remained a minor player in the entertainment world, often introduced as Al Jolson's brother rather than as an artist in his own right. This dynamic was frustrating and humiliating for Harry, who longed to be recognized for his own abilities rather than constantly living in Al's shadow. For Al, however, his dominance over his brother was just another extension of his need for control. Though he may have cared for Harry, he had little patience for playing the role of a supportive sibling. He expected admiration, not competition, and this attitude only widened the gap between them. Over the years, their relationship became increasingly strained, with Harry harboring deep resentment toward Al, while Al continued to focus solely on his own career. Beyond his brother, Jolson's work relationships were also turbulent. He often clashed with directors who tried to impose artistic limitations on him, and he had little tolerance for co-stars who attempted to outshine him on stage or screen. His temperamental nature made him a difficult figure in Hollywood, and his reputation as an arrogant perfectionist followed him throughout his career. Despite his difficult personality, Jolson also had loyal friends and admirers who recognized that beneath his egotism was a man driven by a deep passion for entertainment. Many who worked with him, even those who struggled with his domineering ways, acknowledged that his talent was unmatched and that his contributions to show business were undeniable. On October 23, 1950, Al Jolson's final curtain call came unexpectedly. After returning from Korea, where he had tirelessly performed 42 shows in just 16 days for American troops, he checked into a San Francisco hotel, exhausted but proud of his service. That evening, as he played cards with friends, he suddenly complained of indigestion. At first it seemed minor, but as the discomfort worsened, doctors were called. Within moments, Jolson uttered his final words, "Oh, I'm going," and collapsed. He was gone before medical help could arrive. The news of his death sent shock waves through the entertainment industry. Though his fame had waned in the years prior, his influence remained undeniable. Jolson had revolutionized entertainment, bringing jazz, blues, and ragtime to mainstream audiences, redefining stage presence with his electrifying physicality, and pioneering talking pictures with the jazz singer. His legacy, however, was not without controversy. His use of blackface, once an accepted theatrical convention, would later cast a shadow over his contributions, making him a complex and polarizing figure in the history of American entertainment. Despite the changing cultural landscape, Hollywood and Broadway paid tribute to one of their greatest showmen. Broadway dimmed its lights for 10 minutes, a rare honor reserved only for the most legendary figures of the stage. It was a silent yet profound acknowledgement of the man who had once commanded standing ovations night after night, whose voice had defined an era, and whose performances had shaped the future of entertainment. Jolson was laid to rest in Hillside Memorial Park Cemetery in Culver City, California. His funeral was attended by friends, admirers, and fellow performers, all gathered to honor the man who had given his life to show business. Even in death, he remained larger than life, his gravesite featuring a striking memorial complete with a grand, outstretched statue capturing him in his signature pose, arms wide open, ready to embrace the audience one last time. His legacy remains complex. To some, he was the greatest entertainer of his generation, a trailblazer who broke barriers and defined the sound of early 20th century America. To others, he was a product of an era of racial insensitivity, whose performances in blackface, regardless of intent, perpetuated stereotypes that modern audiences reject. Yet, even as perspectives evolve, Jolson's impact on music, film, and theater cannot be erased. More than 7 decades after his death, his recordings still echo through time, his performances preserved on film, and his influence evident in every artist who commands a stage with unapologetic charisma. He was a man who craved adoration, demanded attention, and lived for applause. And in the end, even as time moves forward, the echoes of his performances still linger.